Next up, we have Thomas Van, and he's going to give a presentation on the FHWA Pavement Preservation Program moving forward. Thomas Van works with the Federal Highway Administration in the Office of Asset Management in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Thomas Van.
Today I'm going to talk a little bit as at a kind of an executive level here. As many of you know, we've had a lot of changes in the way we do presentations with Federal Highway. There's a lot of concern about what gets said. You notice we don't put many images in anymore because they're very concerned about who owns the image and do we have permission to use it, et cetera, et cetera. So that process has become one of plausible deniability and making sure of everything. Now, this particular presentation has been approved, so as long as I don't stray off the target, I'm in pretty good shape here, I guess. Yeah. Now, you heard a little bit earlier about I'm supposed to be an expert. I don't know about the expert piece, you know. I did do some work on the rulemaking a while back, and that was, we're not going to talk about that today. As I said before, I'm going to try to do a little bit of executive things. I'm talking about Jason and some of the contractors and some of the others who are here. We'll be following up a little bit with some of the details about some of these projects as well. So I think the first thing I want to do here is talk a little bit about our strategic approach on this thing and what's going on really at Federal Highway. So if I start at this high level of this thing, where are we at with preservation on it? Historically, we've never really had a lot of support for preservation program at Federal Highway. Even when Mr. Sorensen was here, it was a struggle getting funding to actually support these kind of programs. Jim had his own ways of doing that, but it's still been quite a big issue with it. However, if you look into our strategic approach, and this came out a little bit earlier this year in our strategic plan, you see that they use the term use of preservation techniques in there. You know, well, that's a start, you know. The thing went on and it talked about key deliverables, and that was unfortunate that there wasn't any key deliverables that they identified with preservation in there. But they do have this little approach in here with objectives on it that didn't have too many high-level details here, but it did kind of give us a little bit of a directive. They said, you know, data-driven, follow asset management principles, supposed to be performance-based. You heard a little bit about that, you know, earlier today from some of the folks. This, in a way, kind of highlights some of the difficulties we've had with pavement preservation over the years, and that is that we have a problem really trying to measure the impact on the highway program. We've never really been able to do that on a network scale on there. You know, we know preserved pavements last longer, but sometimes we don't know how much, and some of them last longer than others, even though we could swear we put the same thing down on the same road, but we don't really know when it works and when it doesn't work, when it's cost effective. Well, what's the long-term impact, you know, on our network? So how do we compare, you know, one treatment against the other? How do you really look for the most cost-effective way to do that? And by the way, you're all supposed to do that in your asset management plan. So, yeah, how's that going? Well, some states have already put it in. Some of you, I'm sure, have talked a little bit about that. Some process has been a little bit iffy about how that's gone on, but it's a start, and it's still working pretty well at this point. And hopefully, it'll lead us in the right direction with some of that. As you start doing strategic planning, the next thing you do is you get into a program vision and mission. You know, think of it this way: vision is how you plan to change the world, and the mission is what you plan to do. All right. So if we take that to start with, you know, you can tie this into what Mr. Chisholm said here about getting to the complaint line. All right. Maybe that's something that we got to think about. Some of the basic thinking we ought to do in here. What makes it work? You know, notice that we've kind of put a little bit of focus in here on being cost effective and working in collaboration. Yeah. The one thing I will add out of our performance management stuff is that our legislation there did talk about state of good repair over the life cycle at a minimum practical cost. Well, now we're talking about state of good repair. Maybe preservation might have a role in that. You know, I think it does, you know, and I think it's an important piece of that. Leo Bagley talked about not likely you're going to see many more federal funds coming down the line here. And from my vision, I don't see that either, you know, but, you know, maybe Mr. Mulford will tell us a little bit more later about what's going on in Capitol Hill. I don't necessarily see gas tax increases happening. Now, I don't think you're going to go out there and argue for a gas tax based on, we're going to do more preservation. I think it's critical, though, and incumbent upon all of us in here to show that pavement preservation is cost-effective method of doing our management. You know, you're not going to get a mandate from us to do that, not from Federal Highway. We're out of the mandate business now. So it's really one about encouraging everybody to do the right thing in here. So the next thing we do is we start looking at strategies as we start talking about our next steps. So our program goals, our objectives. So objectives always have to be written somehow so that it's like, well, what's coming out of this? So if we can really work, if our agency can help work toward getting everyone to understand benefits and get some of these knowledge gaps filled. Judith talked about a whole lot of research work that needs to get done. You know, I mean, just some basic thinking about some of that stuff. You notice we also put a little bit of focus here on capacity building. You know, we got to link this stuff to asset management. We got to link it to performance-based planning. You know, those priorities. We got to get some measurable incomes out of that. Alicia talked a little bit about some of that stuff. And at a high level, that stuff is really important. Most of us in here are engineers. So what you end up doing as you start into this whole process is you say, well, we take a big problem, we make it into little problems. You know, a bunch of little ones, so that's why it works. So if you start thinking about the big problem is, well, why don't we do preservation? If it makes sense, why don't we do this stuff? And we started doing a little bit of brainstorming, a little bit of thinking about this internally on that. And we came up with some of these barriers, some of these challenges that we have. Not everybody believes this stuff works. You know, there's a certain amount of uncertainty in here, a certain amount of skepticism. You know, can we show its value? You know, is there a link to performance? You know, is there something we can actually show in here? Do we have the experience to do this stuff? You know, there's a lot of turnover in the workforce. You know, do we really know how to select the right projects at the right time? You know, do we have contractors in the right places to do all this stuff? You know, some states tell us, yeah, we'd love to do microservicing, but the nearest contractor is 800 miles away. You know, well, that's maybe not in the Northeast here, but that could indeed be a problem in some of the states where we're at. And then on the other side of it, if you don't have the programs, how does the contractor justify making the investment in the equipment and the materials and the training and all the things it takes to make these things happen? And then in the end, what incentive is there to actually do this? You know, do we have incentives? You know, there's no federal incentive program on that right now. Maybe we need to think about that some more. And so we did a lot of thinking on that stuff. A lot of discussion went on with it. And as a result of that exercise, you know, we started talking about, well, is there a federal role in here? Okay, and if we look at high-level activities, this is kind of the way it's always worked out. You always had the research, which then led to the development of some kind of project or program, and you had the deployment that happened. That went into my office, you know, do the deployment, and then states would do this implementation, and we'd measure some outcome, and then the whole thing evaporated away, and nobody knew what happened. And so what we needed to think about is how do we change some of that. This continuum still is in place now when we talk about our research elements of it. If you want to do research, you got to be able to show where it fits into these other programs. With preservation, I think you really can follow the sequence of activities. It's just something we haven't really done before. And we really haven't done it, at least not real seriously. There's a lot of holes in the continuum, a lot of stuff we don't know. There's a lot of stuff we don't follow up on. A lot of stuff is not coordinated. And there's a lot of stuff someplace, and as Judy said, if we could find it, it'd be great. You know, a lot of studies have been done, and we just don't really know where those all have gone. I think one of the big examples that I have directly that I've worked on, the Sharp 2 R26 project. We learned a lot in there about pavement preservation, high traffic volume roads, but we don't really have a follow-up program on it now. The program's coming to an end here in a couple months, and I don't have a program to follow it up with. Another example we've got is the EDC4 When and Where project. That never really got off the ground in the first 2 years. We may still deliver some useful products out of that stuff. I do have some things in the pipeline right now. You know, we'll have to see. I don't know where there's any funding to go any further with that, you know. So let's take a look a little bit at where we are going. Some of the decision-making, I guess, that is getting done on this. Focus areas, some needs and research. We certainly agree. We need to know some research, and not necessarily at real high levels. We need to know some real simple things like, why does this thing work here and not there? You know, when the pavements, look the same and seem to be the same, something's different in there and we don't know what. We need to convince the decision makers. Why do we need this? How does it work? We need to tell a better story. We need to get some performance curves, that work. We need to get some decision makers in these long-term programs. Maybe we even need to establish some incentives for doing the right thing here somehow. Can we even pull this existing information together, make it accessible? So we're going to kind of focus on some of these areas a little bit. We're going to try to work with the PPDG. We're going to try to work with this roadmap, work with the industry, try to make this happen. I can not wait until I can read the whole business about where the tomato industry took this. That's got to be a really interesting study. When we were doing the rulemaking, we always talked about widescreen TVs and how do you get those delivered without breaking them. Tomatoes might even be more interesting. I don't know. And eggs, I don't know. What was it, a couple weeks ago? It wasn't good to eat eggs. This week, I don't know if it is or not. What should you expect in the next coming year here? I don't want to promise anything, not going to happen. That's not the way we do it here. We are talking about doing some research, including getting involved maybe with the NCAT and Min-Road project. They talked about it. I don't want to promise that yet, but we'll see. We're going to do some peer exchanges. We're definitely going to get some training program. We're going to try to coordinate it together so that we actually have something that makes sense in that terms of a continuum in there, because we've kind of been a little disoriented here in the last few years. We have some workshops still coming up. We are not quite finished with Sharp 2. Definitely have a little bit more work to do in EDC4. We have a very big outreach and marketing program that's going to happen out of EDC4 as well. And for those of you who don't know, EDC4 is about strategic pavement preservation and how to make that happen. Some of the opportunities that you can get involved with, we're going to have a synthesis of practice and implementation guides coming out shortly. We're kind of in the final stages of doing the reviews and publication things right now to try to make that happen. We're going to be doing a pilot program to integrate pavement preservation in some of the pavement programs. So this one will take and try to assist some states. Maybe there's some financial incentives. We'll have to work out some details about how that's going to work, but that's definitely in the works. My team leader says to me that I need to make it happen. So we're going to make it happen. So we will have the participation, some workshops and training. The funding is secure for all these opportunities on that, so I know that they're all going to be happening. So if you have interest in that stuff, just feel free to contact me. We're open here for any questions now, or you want to do that later? All right, thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.